So this is worksheet 2, number 11. Sine x plus cotangent cosine equals something. Did you try something on this one?
No, I didn't know how to do it.
Just stuck. Any ideas on what we could try first?
Sine squared. Wait, no, that's not squared.
Yeah, that stuff, the squared stuff only works if there's a squared there, and there's not. So, kind of stuck on that part. Well,
Cosine.
Go ahead.
Cosine is cosine squared. Couldn't you change your mind?
Where's cosine times cosine coming from? You're right.
The cosine x.
But where's cosine x, cosine x? I see cotangent x, cosine x.
I misread that though. I got that.
But you're kind of right anyway, because what's cotangent? Cosine over sine. If you're stuck, and this one is one where I would be stuck on, probably the safest thing to do is to change everything into sines and cosines.
Wait, what if you divided everything by cosine?
Divide by, you can't divide by because there's not two sides of an equation.
Yeah.
So if you're stuck, change everything into sines and cosines. Like there's 6 trig functions, sine and cosine are 2 of them. The other 4 can be written in terms of sine and cosine. So if you're stuck, then whatever is not cosine or sine, write it as cosine or sine, or whatever the ratio is. Okay, let's see. I don't know that that's helpful, but I replaced cotangent with cosine over sine. And now the cosine times cosine, that would be cosine squared.
And then can you cross out the sine of x and sine of x over 1?
Oh, algebra. Those are being added. And you asking if you can cross out those signs? You didn't ask that. We'll pretend you didn't ask that.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to add fractions, though, what does it take to add fractions?
Just make the like terms bottom.
I got to have a common denominator. So what would my common denominator be? Sine of x. So I'm going to put sine of x in the top and bottom to make the denominators match. We do more of that kind of stuff today, like make the denominators match. It's the same rule, it's just now you're doing it with trig functions. So the denominator sine, the top is now sine squared plus cosine squared, which is 1. So hopefully we recognize that one. The others I don't recognize as quickly. That's why I have the others written down that I can refer to if I need to. But sine squared plus cosine squared is 1. And then 1 over sine of x is cosecant of x. So that was a good one. Lots of stuff going on in that one. At least 2 trig identities and a little bit of algebra. 3 trig identities and then algebra. This way?
Yeah. Could you do number 14?
Number 14. 14. So there's nothing obvious to do. It's already in terms of sine and cosine. This one, there's 2 ways to go. So this is one of those where you probably need your teacher to do it in order for you to know how to do future ones. There's a trick we do on some of these. If you ever see 1 plus cosine or 1 minus cosine or 1 plus sine, you can multiply by its conjugate and some weird things happen. So what would the conjugate of 1 plus cosine be? 1 minus cosine. So that's,
But then it's also
yeah, that one's you've probably not seen before, but that's a trick that you need to add to your tool bag that if something like this shows up, there's no squareds there, so I can't use any of those Pythagorean identities. Everything's in terms of sines and cosines. I'm kind of stuck. If you multiply top and bottom by conjugate of the top, or maybe the bottom, looks like 13 might be the same type of question here. Then watch what happens. So we FOIL the top. I'm going to say we've done enough foiling that we know that when we FOIL conjugates,
That ends up crossing out.
the middle terms cancel out, and so we're good on that.
It's minus cosine squared.
And then it's minus cosine squared. That triggers something in my brain, so I'm going to check that out in a minute. Can't really do anything in the bottom, so let's leave that alone. Let's see, I know that sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. So what does 1 minus cosine squared equal? Yeah. So I can hopefully, you have this memorized or you write it down, and then you can rearrange it either in your head or you can write it down if you need to. If you move the cosine over, you get 1 minus cosine squared. So 1 minus cosine squared is equal to sine squared. And then, I'm also looking at my answers. It's kind of looking like D because there's a 1 minus cosine in the bottom. What can I do? Yeah, one of the signs would cancel. Sine squared over sine. One of the signs would cancel. And I'd be left with sine of x over 1 minus cosine x.
I saw that either C or D like right away, but
So multiplying top and bottom by the conjugate is a fairly common thing in this. Well, I don't know, it's common. If you're stuck, if you see something like this, it's kind of a giveaway that you're going to be multiplying by the conjugate. And so 13 is similar.
so do we just get lucky that's just a flip of the one? Or is that how it's always going to
No, it kind of always works that way. So if you look at 13, it's probably going to be sine in the bottom. No, cosine in the bottom and 1 plus sine in the top. So it's
like A.
It's probably A, but we'd need to multiply it out to make sure. But yeah, it's probably
That's
A.
a good rule of thumb if you just don't know.
Well, you're not going to memorize that. Just know what to do. Like, people want to come up with, oh, do I need to memorize that? Like, well, yeah, if you want to memorize a gazillion things every year, I'd rather you understand it and know how to get there. That way you don't have to memorize. Anything else from that worksheet? Andrew? Number 8. Cosine cubed plus sine squared cosine is equivalent to which of the following? Hey, do you have any idea on number 8? Because there's no substitutions you can do, really, right? Because everything's already in cosine and sine. Both of those have a cosine in them. So I'm going to factor out that cosine. And that would leave cosine squared plus sine squared. Oh. What's cosine squared plus sine squared? 1. And so that's an easy problem if you know what to do. If you could see to factor out a cosine.
So how'd you get that?
From the original equation, that S squared plus C squared.
Yeah.
I recognized that these both had a cosine in them, so I could factor that cosine out. And when I factored out one cosine, when I did that, magically things were left over that was nice.
So, I see that. Yeah. You just
Ty? Because I know that cosine squared plus sine squared is 1. Like you've got to know these, or at least know them well enough to recognize and then go check what you know. Let's see. So that's the first one. Got to know that one. I don't have the others memorized. I know that if I divide by cosine, I get tangent squared plus 1 equals secant squared. And if I divide by sine squared, I get 1 plus cotangent squared equals cosecant squared. So I have to know those. And maybe not have them memorized really well, but at least recognize that when squareds pop up, I need to have this maybe written down so I can go back and see what's going on with a squared trig identity or a squared trig function.